Okay, we're doing quotes now. We're going to do Johannes Kepler, a couple intermediate figures, and then we're going to do Soren Kierkegaard. We're from the book Holy Grail of Wisdom, quotes by me, P. Rogers. And Kierkegaard is one of my favorites, so we'll spend a little more time with him. Johannes Kepler was a great astronomer. He figured out how to get rid of the epicycles by calculating that the planetary orbits were elliptical. And, he basically saw himself as following in God's footsteps, as Copernicus and other early men did, even Galileo, okay? And they were contrasting what they were seeing with Aristotle's previous ideas. Aristotle didn't have any way to magnify what was happening up in the sky. Anyway, so here's some words of Kepler. He figured out the rules of planetary motion in a Copernican system, that orbits were elliptical, not round, perfect spheres. He said, "For many years I had wanted to be a theologian, but now I see how God is praised by my work in astronomy. Science is the process of thinking God's thoughts after him. The chief aim of studying the external world is to discover the rational order and harmony imposed on it by God, which he reveals to us in the language of mathematics. The wisdom of the Lord is infinite. The heavens declare the glory of God." Okay, this is another reason why, I've studied a lot of science history. This is how the old scientists typically talk, the great geniuses that figure out important things for mankind and Western civilization. Okay, the Catholic Church built civilization. That's a fact. Open up a couple of books and you will see that for yourself. After the fall of Rome, I've been reading lately about the Middle Ages. After the fall of Rome, all the barbarian tribes are all fighting with each other, and each group wants its group to win, and they just kill each other to see who wins, okay? That's what you get without Christianity. And that's pretty much how most of the world is today. And they take slaves and, they do all these other things. But Christianity says, no, be nice. It's the only thing I'm aware of that says be nice to people, even if they're not from your group, not from your country, your tribe, whatever. It says be nice to other people. Okay, and the other thing is it said God created you in his own image, so you too can be a creator, so it gets you to create. That what you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me. Be nice to people who are weak, because most people are weak, okay? So you're either going to be nice to them or you're not. So anyways, Christianity does all of that. It began the scientific, modern science, it began the universities, everything. And what I'm saying is Kepler's a typical example, Newton's a typical example. Okay, so let's continue with Kepler. The original Pythagoreans worshipped the sun. Early astronomers promoting a heliocentric view were called Neo-Pythagoreans. Okay, that's a quote actually by Professor Kors. He's a really good college professor. He has a course he teaches over at thegreatcourses.com. That's very good. Okay, so here's a Kepler quote. "It does not matter if my book finds its reader in 100 or even 1,000 years. Has not God himself waited 6,000 years for a human mind capable of gazing on his celestial spheres with understanding?" That's the attitude of him. He considers himself the greatest genius in the first 6,000 years. Okay, but a guy's got to be confident if he's going to ever have any big achievements. All right, now just a brief quote from Ken Casey. Ken Casey's kind of a jerk, I did like the fact that he used to be a wrestler, and he wrote, the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, a pretty famous book from the 1960s. He's also the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That was a movie with Jack Nicholson as Randall McMurphy, and he ended up getting a lobotomy, and the nurse was Nurse Ratchet. Okay? Ken Casey quote, "To hell with facts, we need stories. You're either on the bus or you're off the bus." The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, bus test. So, he's a bit of a crazy jerk, became a drug addict. He did have a talented mind, obviously, but, he's kind of an educated derelict. Okay, just briefly, Francis Scott Key, he's the author of the Star-Spangled Banner. "Oh, say does that Star-Spangled Banner yet wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave." We used to sing these songs in school when I was in grade school. "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing." All this patriotic stuff, it was good. It's good for kids to learn that when they're young. They should be studying the Bible too. Okay, now the highlighted today is Soren Kierkegaard. He's also called the Danish Socrates. And he was a brilliant guy. He's sort of like inwardly tormented a little bit. He lived from 1813 to 1855. And he did a lot of funny things. Like he would write in pseudonyms, and then he'd write a book in a pseudonym, and then he would make book reviews of it in pseudonyms, and he would say how terrible the book was. He's funny. Michael Sugrue, the great philosopher, the best philosophy professor ever. I've previously done videos about Michael Sugrue. He has a good lecture on Soren Kierkegaard. I like Soren Kierkegaard more than Sugrue does. I'm more religious than Sugrue. And I get where Kierkegaard's coming from. Yeah, I can feel it in my own self when Kierkegaard goes through what's, giving him a hard time. And for example, there's a big thing about the difference between Hegel and Kierkegaard. Hegel was a German philosopher, blowhard BS artist, sort of a preliminary to Marx and Engels. And Hegel was a big fan of having the glorifying centralization of power. And he would talk about there's a thesis, there's an antithesis, antithesis, and then there's a new concept called the synthesis. And that's the Hegelian dialectic, it's been called. Anyways, so that's sort of saying, yes, we can always come up with a new, better, syncretic option from the two possibilities. And what Kierkegaard says is, no, you can't. A lot of situations are either or, and that's also true. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. Okay, you're either married or you are not married. Some things are either yes or no. All right, and a lot of things in life are like that. You and a woman, you're either together or you're not together. You're not kind of together. You're either together or you're not together. And so a lot of things are like that. You have to choose. Like let's say you're a medical student, 4th year. You have to choose what specialty you're going into. You can't be a surgeon and not be a surgeon. All right. Anyways, Sugru described him as morbidly introspective. Okay, a theological romanticist, a philosopher comedian, a serious jester. All of that stuff is a good way to describe him. Okay, like typical quotes I love by Kierkegaard. You don't just think your way through a philosophic problem, you feel your way through it. Yeah, your emotions are part of your thinking. He'd say things like, how does one choose between Athens, which sort of was to mean science and philosophy, versus Jerusalem to mean religion and faith? Okay. He was described by Sugru as half theologian, half philosopher. And then also I like what Sugru said about him. He said Kierkegaard is the best theologian since Pascal. And I'd agree with that too. These were serious religious questions for himself. And he felt his philosophical religious work was so important that he decided not to get married, which is probably a mistake for him, but that's what he decided. Okay, now here's some quotes by Kierkegaard. Some more. He says, I am a missionary. I bring Christianity to Christendom. Okay. I kind of like that because you can spoof off all these very easily, I'm a missionary. I bring true medicine and knowledge of nutrition to healthcare, which doesn't know its head from its ass on those topics. Okay. He says, Christianity has done away with Christianity without being quite aware of it. Catholicism has a conception of the Christian ideal to become nothing in this world, whereas Protestantism is worldliness from beginning to end. Every human has a natural need to formulate a life view, a conception of meaning, of life, of its purpose. Melancholy men have the best senses of humor. Yeah, that's kind of like the idea of the antisocial person's funnier because they're more outspoken. They don't care what people think about them. They'll have more insights. Sugru says, the ironic humor and psychic tension, his volatile combination with religious intensity, he reminds us of Blaise Pascal. Okay. He had an intense strain, making his anguish typical of a romantic writer. So yeah, the Romanticism was a bit of a reaction to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, let's say in the late 1700s, looked back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, this idea of mankind as the most high animal on earth because he was so much able to reason and think. And, the philosophes thinking all they needed was reason, which is not true. Okay, Romanticism was, no, you guys are missing the boat. The emotional component of our thoughts and feelings is very important. And so Romanticism really looked back to Christianity, like Christianity in the Middle Ages, for example. Okay, so in a sense, Sugru said that Kierkegaard was turning his back on the Enlightenment. Okay? All right, and then the names of his books were kind of funny. Things like Fear and Trembling. Okay? All right, so now here's a long quote from Kierkegaard. It's really good. Self-creation is the ultimate task of man. Possibility means I can. It is convenient to say that possibility turns into actuality, but it's not so easy. You don't just think your way through a philosophic problem, you feel your way through it. There is an intermediate step called anxiety. Anxiety arises from awareness of having a variety of options but not being sure which one is best. If man were a beast or an angel, he would not be able to be in anxiety. But since he is both beast and angel, he can be in anxiety. And the greater the anxiety, the greater the man. If we move forward, we have anxiety. But if we do not move forward, we suffer from depression, the pressing down of the soul's purpose. And this is just like the tension you feel if you're like trying to choose a medical specialty. Well, if I go into ophthalmology, all these good things, but these bad things. But instead, if I go into, imaging guided surgery, here's the pros, here's the cons. Okay, so Kierkegaard continues. In such a difficult choice, we must choose anxiety, for anxiety is at least the path of personal growth. Depression is a stagnation and a defeat of life. Too much conformity drains away life. Individuality is like riding a wild stallion, whereas conformity is falling asleep on a hay wagon. The person who is right often has to stand alone. To be able to despair is an advantage, for it implies that one has a self. The key factor is whether one is conscious of their despair. Despair is not just a lack of hope. Despair is a failure of development of self. Everybody knows you're stuck in a stagnating job, you're not making any progress, you feel like you're just wasting your time to make a little money. That's frustrating. The most common form of despair is not being who you are. Everybody knows that. When you're not able to be your true self, you have to, be PC at your job or whatever. The more consciousness, the more intense the despair. But the more consciousness, the closer one is to eradicating the despair and to living a genuine life appropriate for a human being. The biggest danger, that of losing oneself, can pass off in the world quietly as if it were nothing. Every other loss, the loss of an arm, of $5, of a wife, and so on, is bound to be noticed. Okay. And here's Kierkegaard. He says, a man who cannot persuade men cannot save them. Yeah, you have that experience all the time. You try to teach a patient about the vegan diet and they just look at you and you can tell they're not going for it. In my experience, men and women tend to react differently. A man will listen and then very often in a stoic way he says, no doc, I can't do that. And so he accepts the reality of it, but he refuses to follow it. I got doctor cousins who say, well, if I get diabetes, I got diabetes, I'll just take the pills. Stupid, but that's what they say. And versus what I get from women more often is I get these like sort of angry little faces, funny little faces, and I tell them you can't eat nuts and seeds if you're trying to lose weight. They don't like it. You can't cook with oil. They don't like it, but it's the reality. I also get these diabetic patients, and I tell them about mitochondria inhibitors and stuff, and they're taking medications that are mitochondria inhibitors. And I say to them, and they wish they could come off them. I'm like, well, are you 100% vegan? They go, well, not quite. And I'm like, are you 100% low fat? They go, not quite. I'm like, well, what do you want? Either you follow the diet, you get with the program, or you're probably going to take those medicines for life and you're just going to keep on getting sicker. Things like AFib, kidney failure, stroke, what do you want me to do? You want me to do a rain dance? What am I going to do? Okay. But that failure to convince people often means that they just get sicker, and that's actually what usually happens. All these people on the internet, they're the ones that are the motivated one that seek it out. But real life patients, they're not that motivated. They're not that curious. Okay, Kierkegaard quote continues, what I really must get clear is what I am to do, not what I must know, except insofar as knowledge must precede every act. What matters is to find a purpose, to see what it really is that God wills I should do. The crucial thing is to find a truth that is true for me, to find the idea for which I am willing to live and die. That is what my soul thirsts for, as the desert thirsts for water. And that's kind of how I feel. I sort of feel like there's nothing more valuable I could do than teach the public about the low-fat vegan diet. And there's also nothing more important that I could do to teach the public about the greatness of Western civilization, so they'll try to save it instead of allow it to continue to be destroyed. What could I do more valuable than that? So that's why I do this. Even though, it takes tons of time, I don't get any money for it, I know it is right, I know it is good, so that's the best I can do with my life, so that's what I do with my life, okay? And that makes me happy because I know I'm doing the best I can. That's sort of like the Schopenhauer quote, a man cannot live a happy life, that's impossible. What you can do is try to live a heroic life, and then because you respect yourself for trying, you're happy. Okay, Kierkegaard's next quote. It happened that a fire broke out backstage in the theater. The clown came out to inform the public, and they thought it was just a jest, and they applauded. He repeated his warning, and they laughed even louder. So I think the world will come to an end amid general applause from all the wits who believe that it is a joke. Yeah, it's like all the stupid Christians. They think all this stuff about them being Jenna, then you know what comes next. Cited is a joke. No, it's happening. Open your eyes. What do you think Ukraine is all about? To get rid of those guys, the white Christian men. Okay? That's the purpose of Ukraine. There's no other real purpose. A truly blessed man is not blessed by faith alone or by works alone, but by both. An age without passion lacks that. Yeah, that's another thing too. You can't have, sola fide, sola gratia, sola biblia, Martin Luther. You need both, of course, faith and works. Okay. Yeah, faith is obviously really important, but works are too. Yes, and I know the thief on the right-hand side was forgiven at the end. And some people say he did no works. Well, he asked to be forgiven. Okay, that's something. Okay, Soren Kierkegaard. Individuality is like riding a wild stallion. Conformity is like falling asleep in a hay wagon. Most men are subjective towards themselves and objective towards all others. Frightfully objective sometimes. But the task is precisely the opposite. To be objective towards oneself and subjective towards all others. The person who is right often has to stand alone. The quest of one's life is to develop one's individual self. While objective truths are known and can be verified by consensus, subjective truths are lived and experienced and can be true for us based on our experience. Subjective truths are more important. He also brought up this concept of a knight of faith. A knight of faith believes in relation to his doubt and throws the entire weight of his existence in that direction. Therefore, doubt is part of it. A knight of faith benefits from accepting his faith and receives joy in it. Artists go forward by going backward. That can be like to say, look at, if you want to have a new thought, read a book about the ancients, okay? To help a man more effectively, I must understand what he understands. If I do not know that, my greater understanding will be of no help to him. Instruction begins when you put yourself in his place, so that you may understand what he understands in the way he understands it. Yeah, you got to see it in the other person's eyes if you're going to be able to help them. Okay, Kierkegaard enjoyed making his points in the form of short stories called parables. So here's a little one. Let us imagine a sailor and assume that he had passed every examination with distinction, but that he had not yet been out to sea. Imagine him in a storm. He knows everything he ought to do, but he has not known before how fear grips the seafarer when the stars are lost in the blackness of the night. He has not known the sense of impotence that comes when he sees the wheel in his hand become a plaything of the waves. He has not known how the blood rushes to his head when he tries to make calculations in such a moment. In short, he has no conception of the change that takes place in the knower when he has to apply that knowledge. Okay, here's the next one from Kierkegaard. Far from idleness being the root of all evil, it is rather the only true good. Yeah, if you want to be a thinker and a scholar, you need time by yourself to just sit around and read. A lot of it. Okay. These are just some quotes about Kierkegaard that basically kind of repeat the same thing. Okay, a little more Kierkegaard. Above all, walk every day. I walk myself into a state of well-being. I have walked myself into my best thoughts. The tyrant dies and his rule is over. The martyr dies and his rule begins. Take a chance and you may lose. Take not a chance and you have lost already. To dare to lose one's footing momentarily, but not to dare is to lose oneself. To dare is to lose one's footing momentarily, but not to dare is to lose oneself. The best news the world has ever heard came from a graveyard. Christ has risen. And by the way, if you want to see good videos about Kierkegaard, I thought the ones over at Academy of Ideas were really good, academyofideas.com. They also have a YouTube, Academy of Ideas. They make really good videos. Those guys, I think they're great. So anyways, I hope you found that helpful.